and welcome or good morning wherever you are. My name is Casey Murphy. I'm ACT's Director of Programs and Events, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our first ACT webinar this month entitled Expand Your Reach with Multifamily TDM, sponsored today by our ACT, Cascade, and Chesapeake chapters. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer your questions as we get going. Second, we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box, again, located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Note, when you're asking a question today, please also identify who the question is for when typing it in. Finally, this session is being recorded and we'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. Now I'd like to go ahead and pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT currently has going on. David?
All right, thank you, Casey. Hello, everyone. Many thanks to all of you who are joining us today. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and welcome to December. For those counting down the days to the end of 2020, we're less than 30 now. We've got another great webinar this afternoon, and the first that was coordinated through the collaborative efforts of two of our chapters, Cascade and Chesapeake chapters. A great example of the wonderful community that we have built coming together to address the unique needs of our members and regions across the country. It's been wonderful to hear from many of you about how important ACT membership has become during the pandemic, providing opportunities for continued learning, networking, and support. ACT continues to welcome new members, and welcome to all of you that are joining us today on the call. We host hundreds of members on our webinars and virtual discussions and continue to certify new TDM CP. Congratulations to those of you that have recently passed the exam, and good luck to the more than 40 individuals that will be taking the exam in the coming weeks. If you're not yet a member, I invite you to join your colleagues and become a part of our community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to update everyone on some of the activities happening within the association. We're currently seeking submissions for sessions at ACT's International Conference to be held at Disney World in early August 2021. This will hopefully be our first major in-person event since 2019, which is hard to believe. So I encourage all members to think about the great work they're doing and to consider pulling together a session. I know for a fact that there are a ton of exciting new programs and initiatives that have taken place over the last months as we've had to learn new challenges or to address new challenges related to COVID. Proposals are due December 23rd. Next Thursday, December 8th, ACT will be hosting Representative Chuy Garcia out of Illinois for a member policy briefing. As a member of the House T&I Committee and co-chair of the Future of Transportation Caucus, the representative will update ACT members on goals for the next Congress and the new administration. It's always a great opportunity for ACT to host an elected member of Congress, so please be sure to register for the event. It is free for all members. ACT is looking forward to working with the incoming Biden-Harris administration to advance important TDM initiatives. It's exciting to know that our efforts over the past 2.5 years to lay a broad foundation for TDM through the introduction of our More Through TDM Act and inclusion of TDM language in the House Invest in America Act and the Transportation Appropriations Report, as well as the Climate Crisis Action Report, we actually may start to see some exciting movement within the next administration that raises the profile of the work that all of you do and hopefully provide some new resources to do it. In the coming days, we'll actually be sharing some of our ideas directly with the Transportation Transition Team. And I encourage you to keep your eyes open for next week's policy newsletter with some additional information. Lastly, ACT recently opened up nominations for the newly approved Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I encourage all members that have an interest in helping lead ACT's efforts to create a more inclusive and representative organization to submit a statement of interest. Information on this opportunity, as well as all the others that I've talked about, are available on our website at actweb.org. Now on to today's webinar, Expand Your Reach with Multifamily TDM, coordinated by the Cascade and Chesapeake chapters. Today we'll hear how TDM professionals work with multifamily residential properties to identify transportation issues and needs and develop TDM programs with innovative mobility opportunities, tailored services, and creative solutions. It's now my pleasure to welcome Kelly Koster, President of the Cascade chapter, to kick things off. Kelly?
Yeah, hi, welcome everyone. My name's Kelly and I work at Loom and I'm the president of the Cascade chapter, as David mentioned. I was delighted when Elizabeth connected Tracy, Emily and myself from the Chesapeake chapter together because of our shared interest in joint webinars. So turns out the first topic that we had chosen, multifamily TDM, had some national interest, and here we are. So it is my pleasure today to introduce Hannah Mullin from our very own Cascade chapter. She is actually also our communications chair on the Cascade board and has a lot of experience with residential and multifamily TDM. As a senior program specialist with Alta Planning and Design, Hannah designs, executes, and evaluates transportation behavior change and marketing campaigns. Since joining Alta in 2013, Hannah has worked on a variety of rewarding projects in unique communities across the West Coast and beyond. Hannah serves on the board of WTS Portland and the ACT Cascade chapter. She is a recipient of the 2016 WTS Portland New Voice Award and the 2017 ACT 40 Under 40 Award. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily from the Chesapeake chapter to introduce our other speaker, Sheila.
Good afternoon. I'm Emily Cass, president of the Chesapeake chapter, and we're delighted to be co-hosting this with the Cascade chapter, and we have over 200 attendees. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I do want to introduce Sheila McGraw. As a program manager at the Destination Sales and Marketing Group, Sheila works with her team to ensure that new and existing developments in Arlington County are decoupled from single occupancy vehicle trips by offering transportation options at the building level. We're so excited to hear what Hannah and Sheila have to say today. So go ahead and take it away, Sheila.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the introductions. Thank you to both of our chapters and to ACT. And I wanted to give a special thank you to Hannah. It was wonderful to find out that I was being paired up with her as we actually went to college together and did a course where we went to Denmark and the Netherlands to look at transit and active transportation infrastructure and programs. Now things are coming full circle many years later. Can you go to the next slide, please? Just a bit of background about what I will be speaking about. The work I'm going to be talking about today is the work done with the Arlington County Commuter Services Program, where I manage the Property and Development Services team, which contains our multifamily program. Prior to this role, I worked specifically on the Arlington Transportation Partners multifamily program. And I'll tell you a little bit about the multifamily program in Arlington County. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Arlington County is located just across the river from DC. We have over 300 multifamily properties, which is important as Arlington has a strong background of smart growth and transit-oriented development planning history, which has contributed to the development patterns in the county, where the majority of our density in our multifamily properties fall along our major metro and transit corridors. Another interesting aspect, which is important to our multifamily program here, is that the community has a character of a transience where people are moving in and out of the DC area and also Arlington. So we have a lot of people coming in who haven't been exposed to transportation options, and it's a new lifestyle for them that's important to the work we do. And so before I go into too much detail about the program, I'll walk you through the agenda for today. Go next. So we're going to be talking about why it's important to have a multifamily TDM program. Hannah's going to be talking to you about some of the best practices she's uncovered. And then I'll be addressing how to incorporate multifamily within your development process. We'll talk about a case study, and then we'll address those questions. So if you have those questions, make sure to put them in the chat box and Casey will get to them at the end. So wanted to start off with a poll question for you all, so we would know who we're talking to today. we're interested in knowing if you operate a multifamily program, if you're interested in starting one, interested in just learning more about multifamily TDM or something else. You can, if you're an other that you think is of interest to the group, feel free to put that in the chat box as well. We'll give you a little while longer to fill this in. We're interested in this information just because when we were talking about it between Hannah and myself, we're more familiar with a lot of the established employer programs, but we're interested to learn who's actually doing multifamily TDM and who's interested in doing it. So yeah, I don't know.
All right, we'll go ahead and end it here for you. Hang on. Okay, I'll share the results for you.
Okay, great. So definitely from these results, it looks like we have a mixture of people. Some people are running multifamily programs, others are looking to start one, and other people are looking to learn more. So if you can go to the next, we can close this and go to the next slide. We hope that some of our takeaways for today will provide each of you, regardless of whether you have a program, are looking at starting one, or just interested, will provide you with a takeaway and allow you to have learned something today. So some of the different things we'll be focusing on are the different approaches to multifamily programs. Hannah and I have different experience, so there's different ways you can run these and different forms they can take. Some of the ins and outs and day-to-day of what this looks like, as well as hear from both of us about our successes and challenges from real life programs. Next. So why is focusing on multifamily TDM important? So I think especially now the importance of home and trips from home has been accentuated with the pandemic. I'll talk later about some of our specific strategies we've been employing over the last several months, but I think right now we all know how important your home or your apartment or wherever you live is, because that's where all of your travel is originating from at this point. Yeah, so multifamily programs think about somebody's complete life and all the trips they take. This includes their work and their non-work travel, which includes things like trips to the grocery store, taking your kids to school, going to the pharmacy, grabbing takeout. A lot of these trips are usually shorter in length and can be done by transit or active transportation. So targeting those trips we think is really effective to change travel behavior in the area where you're working. Another thing we think about is that multifamily, what you hear in this industry all the time is it's all about location, location, location. So this is how developers are thinking about where to build, how buildings market themselves, and how people choose where they're going to live. So a lot of this focus has to do with transportation, because people choose to where they live because they're looking for a certain kind of lifestyle, and transportation is a key aspect there. Additionally, the multifamily market is an extremely competitive one, which is important in that they are looking to get ahead, and working with on their TDM programs is one of those aspects. So capitalizing on that opportunity is really huge. And last, going back to our behavior change roots and theory, we know that one of the moments that's ripe to drive behavior change is a major life change, which is a move. So with moving as one of those moments, with a multifamily program, you can reach residents at that exact time, which is a key for success in driving behavior change. So next slide. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about statistics, and again, why is this important from a data and numbers perspective? So according to the 2017 National Household Travel Survey, over 45% of daily vehicle trips are less than 3 miles long. And for those of us with any kind of planning background, that is an important number. That less than 3 miles long aspect is our trips that can easily be converted. So with that, and now that we've talked about why we should focus on this, Hannah will get into some of the best practices.
Thanks, Sheila. So like Sheila said, I'm going to set us up by just talking about some best practices And in particular, I'll be talking about my experiences piloting a multifamily transportation campaign. And if you're interested in learning more about this project after this webinar, you can access these best practices and more in a playbook that we created. That's at the URL in your screen. So for a little background, just in the summer of 2014, I supported the development of a pilot program that was hosted by King County Metro in Washington State and the Seattle Department of Transportation. I really want to acknowledge these two agencies for supporting such an innovative project and focusing so much on the topic of multifamily TDM. The goal of this program was to encourage residents from 6 multifamily properties in the Seattle area to use transportation options rather than drive alone. And for this pilot program, we used an individualized marketing or a smart trip style campaign model that offered participants supportive communications, events, rewards, and resources and tools about transportation options near their properties. Slide. So the first best practices I'll share are on setting yourself up for success with a multifamily transportation campaign. But before I get started, I want to acknowledge that there are lots of ways to work with multifamily properties, and your strategies will definitely depend on the context of your project. So the best practices that I'll be offering are what worked for us in the context of this pilot program. So when planning a program, we found that it can be really helpful to just consider the character of the property that you want to work with. For example, it's key that there are a variety of transportation options near the actual building that you're working with. If there are limited transportation options, as TDM professionals, we all know that asking residents to try transportation options will be a hard sell. This doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's just a reminder that this is a marketing program, and to market something, we just have to have something to sell. So you can see here on the slide, there's some questions just to research as you're planning your program, such as what transportation options are available. You can also find out what options residents might want information on. For example, some of our buildings were near bike share stations, and so we thought it'd be great to provide residents information on how to use bike share, how much it costs, etc. You may also want to consider the character or the culture of the community of the building, and you can do this by asking questions just about whether there are shared spaces in the building, if residents have sort of a cohesive community, if they mingle in those shared spaces. You may also want to ask if there are just places nearby that residents can walk or bike to. Other questions you could ask are just sort of the age of residents in the building and what languages residents speak. And by gathering all of this information before selecting the properties you want to work with, you can really set yourself up for success. Next slide, please. So for this pilot program, we created a variety of scoring spreadsheets that were intended to help us select the properties we wanted to work with. Because in Seattle, there's a lot of multifamily properties, and so we figured we needed some really evidence-based tools to help us narrow it down. And these tools are linked to in the playbook I've linked to previously. Now, once we selected the properties we wanted to work with, the next step we took was to start just building a relationship with the property manager or the property management company. And that brings me to my next point. Next slide, please. Which is property managers are key. And this is definitely one of the major lessons learned for us, is that it may take some time to build a relationship with a property manager, but it's essential that you find your best contact at the property or the properties that you're working with. And by best contact, what I mean is someone who understands or is interested in learning how transportation options can really benefit their residents. This is someone who understands that these options can improve their parking demand issues, can help them retain current residents and might help them attract new residents. Going back to Sheila's point, in other words, it's someone who understands the value that your program offers them and makes their building competitive with their market. And then the best contact is also someone who's really empowered to support your campaign, whether that means lending resources, just some space in the building, or some of their time. And because property managers are often very busy and have other priorities besides your program, it could just mean giving you access to their residents in some shape or form, whether that's sending an email to residents or just letting you borrow space in their building for an event. There's definitely lots of levels of what property managers can offer you, and it's really important to just communicate with them and make sure that they have some level of power to support you. And as we also found, you may need to go higher up the chain of command. Rather than just working with the property manager, you may need to just find someone who can prioritize the program for the rest of their company. So maybe there's an owner or a building coordinator if it's a larger company. Another reason to find someone who's higher up in the chain of command at a property is just to make sure you have a contact established in case the property manager who you're working with leaves their position. And this is especially important as we found that in the case of property managers who we worked with, there is a lot of turnover rate, or a high turnover rate. So forming a relationship with someone like this can also, forming a relationship with someone who's higher up the chain of command can also allow for opportunities to expand your program. For example, if you're working with a company that owns multiple buildings and you have this person who's really interested in your program and offering it to all of their residents, then there's opportunity to expand your program from there. And on this slide, you can see these are some tools that we provided once we did find the right person who we wanted to work with at each property. We gave them these tools that really just sort of set the expectations and decision-making protocols for how we want to work together. In our case, we provided property managers with a framework. That's what's on the left of the screen for the program. And this framework included just information like the details of the program, when, where, how it's happening, the benefits of the program, just to sort of remind them of why we're doing this, why we're working on this together to increase parking supply, to help their residents get around and make their building attractive to new residents. And then it also outlined just who would be responsible for what. And this was customized to each program. So for some property managers, that meant I'm going to lend you some space. I'll support you in reserving those spaces in our building. For other property managers, that meant I'll email my residents and let them know about your program and be really, more of an invested partner because I have the time and capacity to do so. And then on the right side of this page, you can see there's another material here. And this was actually a sort of cheat sheet that we provided to property managers that they could sort of use to answer residents' transportation questions. So we understand that property managers in many cases are also not familiar with transportation options around their building. And so this is really intended to sort of provide them with a list that they could refer to if residents have questions. So once we established who we were working with and set expectations and responsibilities, we really just continued to utilize and build on this relationship. And to do this, we met with our contacts, property managers, and involved them with the actual development of the program if they had the capacity to do so. So we really relied on our property managers to find out what the needs of the residents were, what rewards or events might be attractive to residents, and what kind of messages their residents might respond best to. And then critically, how best we can reach residents and what options they had for reaching residents, because as we know, every property has a lot of different ways they communicate with residents. So the property managers we worked with, some of them, I think actually all of them were unable to give us the emails of their actual residents, which makes sense. But a lot of them were able to actually email residents for us and distribute flyers. So it'll depend on each property. Like I said, each one is different, but we were able to work with each one to find different ways to reach residents. And then we also just really remained open to property managers' feedback when working with them to develop programs. For example, one property manager we worked with just requested that we not run a program in summer because that was their busy season when they were starting to lease a lot of their apartments. And so they just wouldn't have time to commit to the program. And we wanted to make sure that they did have that time. Next slide, please. So once we gathered all of that information from our property managers, we started creating some promotional materials and planning events for the program. Next slide. So for our promotional materials, our goal was really to show residents that this program was for them specifically. And to do this, we included the building logo on all of our materials. And then we also tried to incorporate imagery from the actual community into those materials as well. We also tailored events to residents specifically. So obviously this was pre-COVID. So in post-COVID times, you might consider something like a neighborhood walk or a bike ride or free pizza and trip planning in the resident lounge. We found that it's one of the benefits of working with multifamily properties is that you have a very captive audience. Everyone's in one building together. And in a lot of cases, you have shared spaces that are really great for starting the events at. We also heard from property managers we worked with that beer and wine were a surefire way to attract residents. This can be tricky for public agencies, so obviously take that with a grain of salt, but we did find that a lot of property managers expressed that as being something that would be popular. And then lastly, while this is different than sort of a Smart Trip style program that we worked on, you may also want to just explore with a property manager about additional infrastructure offerings. For example, SDOT, Seattle DOT, had explored with some of the properties we worked with the idea of adding real-time arrival reader boards for transit, bike parking, and bike share stations. Sheila will get into more of these types of offerings, but I wanted to mention it just as like you're building these relationships with property managers, and there can always be other opportunities to offer more. And then finally, your property manager or contact that you're working with can help you really understand what will resonate best with residents and whether including other ideas like including program information in leasing packets or other ideas that they have for reaching residents might be successful. So it's really, we found it was really helpful to just rely on property managers because they have an extensive amount of knowledge about their residents and their building. So by really learning with our property managers and collaborating with them, we were able to make this program really relevant and meaningful for residents and really targeted specifically because they are all together in this one place. So now I'm going to hand it off to Sheila to talk more about training property staff and working with multifamily programs in the development process and to share some case studies. I do see we have some comments, but I think we'll get to those at the end of the session. So Sheila, take it away.
Great, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, Hannah had some great tips and best practices for what you can do on a property that's existing. And I wanted to kind of continue in that vein, talking about another offering that we work heavily on, and that's conducting trainings with the staff at the property. Hannah talked about the importance of that connection with a property manager, which we see, again, that's a key aspect to implementing programs. Once you have that relationship and in with a property manager, connecting with as many levels of staff we've found is the best way. Focusing on our B2B model, we use these trainings to extend our TDM knowledge to all the property staff and empower them to, in turn, share resources with the residents. So we'll do trainings not only with our property managers, but with our leasing staff and with our front desk or concierge staff, if that applies as well. So making sure all the staff at the building that interacts and interfaces with your residents on a day-to-day basis and who they might ask questions about transportation and can answer them, and not only answer them, but get them excited about walking to the bus stop or anything like that is key. So again, I think it's for them, it's meeting our mutual goals. A lot of times for attracting and not only attracting, but retaining residents, you'll have your property managers and leasing staff focus on their internal building amenities when we can bring to the table information and knowledge about how to market and talk about what's right outside their door and what really makes the neighborhood attractive, whether that's the bike share station they have 100 feet off their property, or the metro that's just down the street, or the bus stop. So bringing that knowledge and how the ability to communicate with residents and give them those resources has been really successful and something we're able to impart during these trainings. I'll just share a little success story to maybe give some insight into what this might look like. So I had worked with a property a couple years ago. They had a bike share station who was, in our mind, underperforming. And the building, it was only 100 feet away from the building. And when I talked to the property manager about it, they were unfamiliar with how to use bike share, and residents were too. So what we ended up doing was conducting a training where it was a training team building activity for her whole staff, where we got everybody from their staff using the bike share system. We went and took it to a local attraction, something they could be able to talk to residents about as well. So they had experience using it and could fully talk to it. And so after that, they were excited about this and went on to host a series of bike share awareness events with residents. And we actually saw a large uptick in the number of bike share memberships from that property. So that's just an example of what some of this might look like. Again, these are all customized to what your focus is and what they're interested in promoting as well. And another aspect of it is that relationship building piece, which we all know is crucial to getting these programs implemented. Next. Yeah, and so up until this point, we've been talking about programs that can be run at existing buildings. I'm now going to talk about some additional aspects of multifamily in Arlington County, where TDM is incorporated in our site plans development process. We're limited on time here today, and this is a full subject in and of itself. So I'm only going to go into how this affects our multifamily properties, but if you're interested in this specific topic area of how Arlington incorporates TDM in the development process, Melissa McMahon of Arlington County Commuter Services and myself conducted an ACT webinar in May of 2019. And Casey, I think, can drop a link in the chat to that if you're interested in this kind of specific topic in more detail, as I'll just give a very large overview of how this affects multifamily. So working with multifamily through the development process brings a lot more players and audience members into the pictures. Not only are you going to be working with property managers, regional managers, but when you're talking, working on things like bike room design, rack specifications, garage access, you'll have other players working with you as well, including building engineers. And then as well, you'll be working with, or in our case, working with our zoning department to make sure things are happening at the right time within the permitting process. So what we do is, as Hannah mentioned, so within those new developments, incorporate some different physical amenities, such as indoor and visitor bike parking, as well as things like transportation information displays, business centers that support telework, on-site car sharing, carpool and vanpool spaces, among some other things, as well as transportation programs that support behavior change, such as giving new residents the options upon move-in of a preloaded transit card, bike share membership, or car share membership, so that they can get up and use these options right when they move in and make sure that this, new footprint, oftentimes much larger density, isn't resulting in a huge increase in SOV rates, basically. So that's what we're trying to mitigate with this type of program. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so we're working at these different phases in the development process. So you'll have your pre-approval, during construction, which will be going out and looking at those physical amenities. And then before they open, we want to make sure some of those programs are implemented, such as I mentioned before, offering preloaded transit cards, bike share memberships, et cetera, things of that nature, so that once the building opens, it's all ready to go and it's happening. And you have that from the ground running, so you're not backtracking essentially. And that's been kind of the goal of this program. And then some of those strategies Hannah mentioned before are what we use during our ongoing operations or throughout the life of the buildings. And then we also have a performance measurement aspect, which actually looks where we go in and conduct studies and see what the travel behavior is like from these new developments. Yeah, again, this is a large subject area, and I'm sure people have lots of questions on it. Again, I would reference that other, I saw some questions about in the chat. So I would reference that other webinar, and of course, we'll take some more questions at the end. I know I'm being very brief with this, but we'll go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is just kind of a photo of some of the things that we have, obviously bike amenities, like a transit screen or transit information display that supports taking transit or metro, or has bike share on it as well as some of these new resident programs. We'll go to the next slide. And then I did want to kind of touch on what's been going on with multifamily TDM in the wake of COVID-19. Obviously, people are spending way more time at home than they ever have. And so how does that affect how we're working with buildings? I think that's it's upended people's lives and work in a completely different way. And so some of the things that we've seen, so we actually went in and did surveys at several properties to see how their travel behavior had changed. And we did that, I think, in April-ish. And then provided them with strategies to support these buildings. Were honestly overwhelmed in the beginning. People, for the first time, were spending the majority of their time in their apartments, and that was just a big change. So we provided them with resources for how they could support telework. This includes things like providing printing and scanning centers to allow, or services to allow residents to utilize those things that, as their companies might have been scrambling to get their technologies together, being that support system and helping bridge that gap at your building and being that value add as a property and something that directly supports the work we do. Business centers, utilizing that as a resource, or creating one that was monitored correctly and cleaned correctly. Also, things like optimizing their Wi-Fi, not only within people's apartments, but within common spaces as well as outdoor spaces. So if people, they have things going on at home, they're able to take an important call or, video conference in a designated area, even outside, so that they could have a little bit of a breather. So there's a bunch of different strategies that can support this. As well as, obviously, we saw a huge uptick in recreational biking and walking. So providing resources to properties to share with people who were looking to get outside, who didn't have access to a gym, with those resources, we were able to help them with that. And additionally, resources for essential workers, our transit fares completely changed and operations. And so providing that information point to property managers who were completely overwhelmed, but we were able to just say, copy, paste, throw it out there, was paramount in that. Next. All right, so now that we've kind of gone briefly over a bunch of different things, I kind of wanted to bring it all together in a case study. This building I'll be talking about is called Tenant Clarendon, and it's a couple blocks away from one of our metro stations. It was a new development that went in and worked with Arlington County through the development process. And one of the things that was unique about this property is they have requirements for how much bike parking they had to put in, but they went and actually doubled what was necessary. So again, they saw the value in providing these TDM amenities to residents, which was wonderful from the get-go. And then prior to opening, I met with them and conducted trainings to make sure they were on board in marketing their building and all the transportation options that were available. And they even came back and asked, wow, we really think we should be marketing our building to a specific bike user audience. And we're interested in that, and seeing that as, again, that market competitive aspect, I think is important. You can go to the next slide. A couple things in this picture I wanted to highlight. They put in a really nice transit screen before opening, as well as they had a really cool bike loan program they also implemented prior to opening, where residents could either themselves or have their guests check out one of these branded bikes they had for the building, which was a first of its kind program I had seen, which was really great to see that they were full-heartedly taking in the importance of transportation and advertising that to residents and getting them on board. And then after opening, since they've been operating for a couple of years now, they've conducted several events that promote active transportation, and as well have been involved in Arlington Transportation Partners runs a Champions program, which is a recognition and rewards program, and they've been doing well and very active in that. So they've been, again, an example of working with us through the development process, and as the building has progressed and is, fully operational at this point. Yeah, so I think you go to the next slide. So again, before we kind of wrap things up, I just wanted to touch again on the importance of multifamily TDM. For those of you, there was a lot of people who were just interested in learning more, and some of you who are interested in starting programs. I'll highlight, you do have a captive audience, with this competitive market. Again, the importance of hitting people when they have this major life event, when they make a move, where they can really change from maybe in their old residence, they were driving a lot, but now they can leave that car or even get rid of it completely and just completely adopt that multimodal lifestyle we support. Yeah, again, we see a lot of a lack of awareness about transportation options with these new residents, as we have them coming in so often. And short trips, we target those short trips at the multifamily level, and trying to turn those over. And again, I just think it's a program that's ripe for impact. Next slide. Again, I think at this point they've been put in the chat, but these are some interesting resources that I would, if you're interested in learning more, explore at your leisure, and I hope can help continue the conversation about multifamily. And with that, I think we're going to move on to the Q&A, and we'll go from here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sheila and Hannah, for a great presentation. Really, truly appreciate it. Before we get started here, I just want to remind folks that if you do have a question for our presenters, so please type it in the Q&A box. I know there were some questions put in chat and then put over, but the chat just gets lost in there with a lot of comments. So please make sure to put it in the Q&A if you can. Real quickly, as some questions are starting to come in, I wanted to ask you about to start things off. What are some of the best ways you found to reach residents?
I can answer that from the perspective of our pilot program. So we actually did also mail like postcards and I believe an order form so residents could order resources directly to residents in the apartments. So that was one of the top ways that residents did hear about our program and opt into our program. And then we also had a lot of success with getting residents to opt in through events that were actually hosted within their building. So like I said, that captive audience thing is really key with residential multifamily TDM programs in that everyone's in the same building. And so we were able to just have some events that were really easy for residents to attend. And then property managers and just word of mouth were also helpful.
Great. Okay, Sheila, anything else to add or no?
Yeah, I think just some of those customized resources upon move-in as well. Events are huge. Yeah, so just reiterating what she said.
Perfect. Okay, great. This next question for you, Hannah. Has Alta created a scoring tool for developers that ranks and recognizes TDM programs? And does Alta bring a translator to all of their events?
Yeah, so for your first question, a scoring tool for developers that ranks and recognizes TDM programs, I don't think we've developed something like this. The scoring tools that I mentioned as part of this presentation were really to help us sort of rank what buildings would be best to work with. But as far as I know, I don't believe we have an actual tool that ranks TDM programs, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Okay.
And then in terms of translators, for the pilot program, we did not have translators. However, for a lot of our programs, definitely depending on the area that we're working in, we'll hire bilingual outreach staff, depending on whatever the language is that's sort of spoken in that community. And then we'll make sure that those bilingual outreach staff are fluent and can talk with residents.
Okay.
Yeah.
This person
Maybe
also, sorry, go ahead, Sheila.
I'll speak to the language aspect of it as well. So we work with, buildings, whether it's from luxury high-end to affordable housing. And so you do deal with, not only, we deal with a multitude of languages. So we'll translate the materials into whatever the property manager will usually dictate, as Hannah mentioned. That's one of the things you should ask them. What are some of the big languages? For us, it's normally, Spanish, Amharic, and we've even had a couple. There's a small Mongolian population. So, and a lot of our outreach staff is bilingual or multilingual. So I think that's something you should really consider when thinking about your multifamily program as well.
Excellent. Okay. This next question, probably for both of you, is there concern for long-term viability of TDM programs at multifamily dwellings with potentially high turnover of tenants and or building management? What are some of the ways of fighting against these potential issues?
I can start. I think Hannah touched on this. So there's two things going on here. I think you have high turnover of residents and then you high turnover of property staff. So I'll just start with the property staff. From that perspective, Hannah mentioned this before, but getting in and getting a contact, normally it's like a regional property manager or somebody even higher up in the company who's bought into the work you do is really crucial, because when they'll tell any new staff member, hey, you need to reach out to this person and get involved with this. So again, developing those relationships at a higher level when you do have that turnover really makes things easier to get in and get things moving. In terms of residents, I don't see that as an issue. I think it's it's actually, why we're here. We're here to educate them on the resource options available. So I don't see that as a challenge. I see that as one of the ways we can really help in providing new members to our communities with all the resources that are available locally.
And I would add that while properties can have high turnover rate of residents, even just getting, maybe you make some headways with getting residents to start using transportation options, and then they move away. But just getting them to start using those transportation options can mean that if they move somewhere else where those options are available, they can continue using them because they've built some confidence and have some self-efficacy that they can use those new options now that they've tried them before.
Excellent. Okay. This next question for both of you again, I'll start with you, Hannah and Sheila, please jump in. How do you measure success? Meeting specific metrics and goals or conducting surveys?
I can take this one first. So for a lot of our projects, including this pilot program, we do pre and post-program surveys where upon the point of entering the program, the participant will take a quick survey, and then when the program ends, take another survey. And our key metric in this case was to measure mode shift. So we want to make sure that the share of trips that our participants are taking decrease when it comes to the drive alone share of trips, and then increase in the share of trips taken by transportation options. And then we also ask some other questions just about like their confidence and awareness. We want those things to go up when it comes to using transportation options. And then we also have some just metrics for us to help us understand more about the program, like how residents heard about the program and what was sort of compelling when it came to getting them to participate.
Yeah, maybe I'll second. I briefly touched on this, but with our buildings that have gone through our site plan development process, we do these performance and monitoring studies, and they'll look at all trips coming in and out of the building. And again, like Hannah mentioned, it's that key metric is the mode split. And so we'll gauge performance based on that, and then follow up and work with the building based on those results.
Okay. Thank you. This next question, both of you pretty much again. Do you see property owners or managers willing to subsidize or pay for on-site amenities like exclusive car or bike scooter share, as opposed to just relying on public programs that may be located nearby? Sheila, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think depending on your community character and what makes a building attractive, I think that, as I mentioned, one of the aspects that does make a building attractive where we are operating are those the ease of the lifestyle of being able to walk out your door and never having to get in a car, and they understand that, especially when you're working with them. So talking to them about providing things like a preloaded transit card upon move-in as like a special. Buildings offer all kinds of specials for signing a lease, and so incorporating transit or transportation in that regard, or you just have to get a bit creative. But they have budgets. It's just getting them to understand why transportation should be part of that pie, I think is part of the job of this person.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add is I think it really depends on the property. We worked with some that were just, excited about transportation options and had, I think, capacity to support those and maybe some funding, whereas others we worked with just didn't have as many resources or perhaps not as much budget to contribute. So we didn't explore that for our pilot.
Okay, awesome. Brings me to my question here we got on funding. How is your multifamily program funded? Is it membership based on units, local, or state funding? Hannah, I'll start with you.
So for ours, I believe it was funded by the Seattle Department of Transportation, but unfortunately I don't know the actual funding mechanism where those funds came from.
Okay. Sheila?
I can look into that if you send me an email and follow up with you that way.
Okay.
And I can do that as well too. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes, it's an anonymous person, but please go ahead and feel free to utilize their contact here on the screen to follow up with that question. Okay, this next one for you, Hannah. Trying to get all these questions answered. Thank you, folks, for all the questions you're typing in. And again, if we do not get through all of them in the next 5 minutes or so, please feel free to reach out to both Hannah and Sheila, and they will do their best to get your questions answered after today's webinar. Hannah, curious, what types of changes will you be implementing to the residential programs you manage due to the pandemic? You mentioned outdoor walks and bike rides. Sheila, you mentioned supporting telework in safe indoor and outdoor spaces. Any other ideas?
Yeah, so thanks, Ross, for this question. It's definitely been a year of pivoting and getting creative with what we have to work with. I think Sheila said it really well that that she's working with properties on helping them buy printers and figuring out how to optimize their Wi-Fi. And it really speaks to how flexible we need to be as TDM professionals. A couple weeks ago, I hosted a webinar with Comcast technician and talked about tips for optimizing your Wi-Fi. I never thought I'd be talking about Wi-Fi, but it's an opportunity and we have to just get creative with those opportunities. So we've been doing a lot of digital and online engagement. One of our more recent programs was the Get There Challenge in Oregon, which is a statewide challenge, and we actually had different activities that people could complete, like reading about how to optimize their Wi-Fi or attending a webinar, and then things like reading about how to get around safely during COVID, or just getting out and taking some photos and submitting those photos. So we're really trying to focus on more digital engagement at the moment and supporting people in making essential trips and in teleworking.
Excellent. Sheila, to the point about telework and safe indoor and outdoor spaces, any other ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think those, again, I think, you got to start with some level and then kind of work from there based on what basic property managers are swamped right now with everybody at home, and helping them. Again, I think it's meeting them at where there's the intersection of where you add value in this challenging time and where their needs are. And I think some of those aspects that Hannah touched on, what I touched on, are really hit on that. I think there's a ton of additional programming you can do, and it's just gauging whether they have the bandwidth to do that at this point. I think that's kind of the big thing right now.
Okay. This next question, I'll start with you, Sheila. Do you feel you had more success working with longstanding units or new units that were working through their site plan review process?
That's a really good question. I think that the people we work with really does vary, and for sometimes it doesn't seem like there's rhyme or reason. When they're working with us through the development process, they have to work with us to some degree because of these requirements. So you obviously have some level of buy-in. But then we've also had some amazing, wonderful partners who've been working with us, because they find value in this for years and years. So again, I think it's really a mix of what you find. And I'll throw it to Hannah before we hit the hour mark.
I think you hit it right on.
All right, should we try to squeeze in one more here real quickly? Sure. Okay. I know there's a little bit more here. Can you expand on your resources for the essential workers during COVID-19 at all? Hannah, I'll start with you if you can.
Yeah, I mean, for this pilot program, obviously it was before COVID, but in more recent weeks, we've been just focused on just giving tools and resources in terms of we have a web page on our Get There Oregon site that just gives some tips for how to ride transit safely and making sure that you're giving people space when walking and biking. And then we did even give tips for carpooling as well, just like making sure to keep windows open and sitting in the front and back of the car, because we know that some people, need to make those trips still. And then I think also just sharing information about how transit agencies are continuing to keep passengers safe on the transit systems is also really important, just to show people what's being done.
Yeah, I think a lot of information sharing. I know for us, like our local transit or bus service, stopped collecting fares. So it's all kinds of things. Like there was a lot of information sharing that went in, especially in the beginning, and is continuing to go on about. We even had discounts on our bike share to support essential workers. So, and most people just aren't going to be aware of that. And that's, your job is to bring that awareness to the table. And so, yeah, a lot of that information sharing in the beginning.
Okay. I really appreciate you both taking the time today to present for us. This was a wonderful presentation, and we did not get through nearly enough questions. I think we still have another 17 more. So if you did not get your question answered today, please reach out to Hannah and Sheila. They'd be more than happy to answer your questions. I want to thank our presenters again for an excellent job well done today. And just want to leave you all with our next and final webinar of 2020 as we do the countdown to 2021, Tuesday, December 15th. New year, new transportation possibilities. We'll be exploring emerging mobility trends for workplaces and campuses, and it's sponsored by We Drive You. So I hope you can join us. Registration is live on the ACT website now to register. And thank you all again for joining us today. I hope you have a great afternoon. And thank you again to our panelists. Bye-bye.